Hello everybody, and that's going to take us to chapter 14, and we're going to take a look at how the internet and its related companies tend to become oligopolies. And that's going to bring us to our chapter here. So we're going to look at internet economies of scale, network effects, digital platforms, and how we may be able to regulate the digital economy. So it's going to bring us to our next slide here. And you could argue the internet is dominated by oligopolist companies. And these are companies that you are certainly well acquainted with, the Microsofts, Googles, Facebooks of the world, and they are extremely large. Apple's another example of an oligopolist company in the internet as well. And why are they dominating? Well, economies of scale and network effects. When you have a tech company, the larger you get, generally you get large economies of scale. It becomes cheaper to conduct business and make products. And also network effects. Why are all of the social media apps we use so popular, Facebook or TikTok or Snapchat or any of them? It's because they have millions of users. You wouldn't want to use a social media company that only had 10 users and there was a million different ones, because it really wouldn't be any value to you. Half the value of a company like that is the fact that all of your friends or family are on it and you can stay in touch with them or share things with them. And that's your network effects. So if we look here, percentage of the population with internet access, this is as of 2021. About 2/3 of the overall global population, and in westernized countries it's the large majority of the countries there. And Germany is the highest, near 100%, the United States around 90 or so, and that's just going down the list of various countries. So what happens with economies of scale here? Well, prominent internet businesses, the Apples, Googles, and Microsofts of the world, they tend towards natural monopolies. One firm can produce the industry's output at a lower cost per unit than if there was more than one firm. And product development, think of tech products, computers, phones, all of the new products that come out, smartwatches and tablets and everything like that, they have very high fixed costs. It's not cheap to develop new tech products. Whereas providing service to additional users has very low cost. So inventing the iPhone is very expensive, but additional users buying iPhones doesn't really cost Apple very much more. So cost per user decline the more customers buy their products. So that's why we get large economies of scale, and internet businesses tend towards monopolies. And this applies to both hardware and software. Software is extremely expensive to develop as well, but once you do, the cost of additional people using it are quite low. And so this applies in both cases. Digital firms incur large costs before products are offered to the public, and that is creating the product itself. These high fixed costs are things like creating the product, maintaining the product, upgrading it, advertising it. And there's no guarantee that the product will appeal. Google tried making a social media company that to compete with Facebook several years ago, and it failed spectacularly. So you can have all the money in the world behind you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your product is going to succeed, and there is a large cost penalty from that product. So when you're developing something like a software product, your costs are fixed without regard to the number of users. So the more users we have, the better for the company. So an internet firm's cost of serving each new customer is extremely low, because now we're going to focus strictly here on software. Software doesn't degrade or depreciate once you've created it, and the really only cost of running Facebook, let's say, or TikTok, it's the electricity, the cost to keep our servers running. So once we bought the servers and built the website, well, our real only costs are just simply maintaining the website and the electricity to run it, and the cost of transferring data on the internet is very low, practically zero. So almost all of the cost of building a new social network, for instance, is in developing it and buying the equipment to run it and launch it. Once you've done that, the costs of keeping it running are quite low in comparison. So the more users we have, the better. And if We look here, here's our marginal cost and average total cost for internet companies with high fixed costs and no marginal. So for things like Facebook and whatnot, we would argue that they have very large fixed costs, but there's really no marginal cost of providing service to anybody else. Our costs are the same regardless of how many people use our platform. It doesn't really cost Facebook money if a new user joins. If anything, it makes them money. So our average cost is going to drop more and more and more as we add users. And that's why if you have a social media company or a software company, you make some sort of office software like Microsoft Office or Photoshop, or you have a social network, any kind of monetized software utilizing the internet, the more users we have, the better. Our costs are going to drop the more we have, more users join our platform. So if we look here, internet firms with average total cost falling steadily towards zero must be two things to gain a profit. Gain enough users so that your average total cost per user gets very low, and get all of its users to pay a price that exceeds average total cost per user. Now you might say that some social media companies don't charge money, which is entirely true because they're making money elsewhere from advertising and something else. So in that case, they would consider their profit per user what they would expect to make per user on advertising revenue and all of those other things. So an online company may need 10,000 subscribers, let's say, to push its cost below $2.99 per month. But if they charge $3 a month, it may drive off users. So they're probably going to need a lot more than that to be able to charge something very little or nothing. And then the advertising revenue is where they make money. The demand curve for most internet products is flat, and it's highly elastic with any positive price. Free internet products are pretty attractive. However, if we start charging money for them, and this is the last line that I'm going to highlight right here, any attempt to raise price much higher than zero is going to cause a significant loss of users. If Facebook tells everybody they're going to start charging everyone $5 a month, I can guarantee you they would lose the majority of their user base. And that's what we're going to look at right here. So internet businesses have highly elastic demand curves like D1. If they raise their price above P0, demand is going to plunge. However, internet firms whose products are subject to network effects may get D2. So if they raise their price above P0, they may lose relatively few users. So if you have significant network effects from some sort of internet product, meaning you get a lot of benefits from the fact that a lot of people use it, it may mitigate if they decide to start charging or decide to raise what they're charging. This is the logic a lot of things like online dating websites have used, those leverage network effects, for instance, to get people to join. No one would join a dating website if there were only 10 people on it, but if there's millions of people on it, people obviously are going to join. And due to those network effects, a lot of them have determined they can charge something to their users, and users would be willing to pay it. You could argue Facebook, TikTok, all of them have tremendous network effects, and they do. But the reason they are free are they make most of their money from having a massive number of users, and to guarantee that, generally, they are going to be free. There are free social media companies like YouTube, for instance, that you can pay for a more premium service. That's another thing that has happened as well to mitigate this point. And we're going to look at various internet firm survival strategies right now. So back to what I said a few slides ago, internet firms can cover their development costs by doing the following. They can sell advertising, they can sell your data, which is something that all of your social media companies do. They both sell advertising to you, and they've gotten very good at targeting ads. They also sell your data, and that can be pretty creepy. You can have things like freemium pricing, meaning it's a free app and then you can charge for additional features. YouTube does this, so free YouTube has commercials, whereas if you choose to pay per month, you get commercial-free YouTube. That gives you additional benefits. There can be in-app purchases. A lot of online games are like this, for instance, where the game itself is free, but if you want better perks or things, you can purchase additional criteria. A lot of websites are like this. And finally, subtractive versioning. You have the option to pay to remove something from the free version of a product. So let's say you download some software and it comes loaded with advertisements or limits or something like that, and then if you pay a fee, it will give you the full version. That's subtractive versioning. So these are all ways you can mitigate the fact that if you start charging something, you're going to lose a lot of your users by having various tiers or price discrimination, or offering the product for free, but then selling both advertising and your users' data. And this is something that is done all the time in various internet companies. So how do internet firms compete? Because a lot of them have significant numbers of competitors. Most of your social media companies are broadly interchangeable. So as a consequence, this keeps prices low. So firms have to use other strategies to raise revenue. If Facebook decided to stop being free and charging $5 a month, they would probably lose a lot of users to various other social media apps, for instance. So even oligopolist firms like Google and Facebook tend to keep prices low, if not or free, and raise revenue through other methods due to these network effects. It is in their benefit to have as many users as possible because they sell advertising and sell data. So back to network effects here. A network is simply a group of people or objects that are connected to each other by a service or piece of infrastructure that facilitates the flow of goods, services, or information. And the internet is obviously a network. Your 5G cell phone network, social media, or things like actual infrastructure like roads or water mains or electricity service or broadband or anything like that. And once again, network effects, we've covered this already in this class. The value of your network depends on how many people use it. The more people that use it, the more valuable the network. So positive network effects, once again, a network's value to each user increases as more people join. What's a negative network effect? If a lot of people stop using it, it decreases its value. So a video game which has gotten replaced and now very few people play it online anymore. It used to have millions of people and now very few do. So that's a negative network effect. Network congestion is pretty straightforward. If too many people are using the network, it can slow it down or cause it not to work as intended. Network pollution is when an excess of users degrades the quality of content in a network. So depending on what the network is, too many users may actually degrade it. And network effects are determinants of demand. The more valuable a network is, the more demand it'll have. The more people want to join it, the less valuable a network is, the less demand it will have. So eventually networks can reach what is known as a tipping point, and that's when the size of the network grows large enough to incentivize more new users to join. And when networks compete, the presence of positive network effects means the network with the largest number of users will become the most valuable. And now you think of this in tech companies competing with each other, cell phone companies competing with each other to get your business, why they will give you the new iPhone for free or run all these advertisements. These are all ways to capture those network effects, become the largest network. Multi-homing or multi-tenanting, what is that? Well, what that is in the case if you have accounts on multiple networks. If you have a Snapchat, a TikTok, and a Facebook, you are a multi-tenant. You are not strictly on one network. Here are various social networks as of 2021 with more than 500 million users. Facebook, almost 3 billion. YouTube, about a little over 2. WhatsApp, 2 billion. And scrolling down the list, here's who owns them. TikTok at this point was at 740 million. I would probably think they're closing in on 1 billion now. This is once again as of about 2 years ago. This is the brand new edition of the book. And one thing with economic data lags, so even the newest data is going to be a year or two out of date. And this, once again, this edition just came out for this book. So if we look here, just scrolling down the list of various networks and their users, some of these are in other countries such as China, but the majority of them are in the United States. Telegram is owned by the UAE. That's the only outlier that is not in the United States or China. So the strength of a network and its effects grows exponentially as additional users join. So this is a simple formula. For any number of users, there will be exactly n, or number of users, times n minus 1 divided by 2 connections. So this is something we're going to look at on the next slide. So the network will grow exponentially as the number of users joins. As the more users join, even if not every connection is used. Connection meaning if you're one user, how many people you can connect with. So if there are 2 users, there's only 1 connection. If there's 4, there's 6. If there's 8, there's 28. That's just simply using that formula we just looked at here. So in 8 users, for instance, it'll be n times n minus 1 over 2. N minus 1 over 2 is 7 over 2 is 3.5. 3.5 times 8 would indeed be 28. So the more users, it's going to exponentially grow. What about technological lock-in and switching costs? Technological lock-in when users are unwilling to switch to more efficient or cost-effective products or technology because of the anti-competitive influence of network effects. So you could argue Google Workspace is as useful or robust as Microsoft Office, and it's also free. But why is Office so widely used, even though it costs money? Granted, if you belong to an organization such as this one, you get it for free, but your school is paying for it. And reasons would be difficulties in switching, the fact that everybody you interact with in a professional manner is using Office, so it's just easier to send files in those formats or anything like that. And this would be a switching cost from getting rid of Microsoft Office. Same thing with lots of legacy tech programs like Photoshop, for instance. That's technological lock-in, where the technology itself is worth it to you for some reason, even though there may be a cheaper or better option. Also, you can make this argument, why hasn't everybody abandoned Microsoft Windows for something free like Linux? Same thing here. And what about network switching costs? Network switching costs are any perceived practical or financial cost switching. So now back to why are all of these phone companies running annoying commercials like T-Mobile has the British guy in the pink suit saying they'll buy out your old phone and give you a free iPhone. Those are all advertisements trying to mitigate those switching costs. That's T-Mobile saying, hey, if you join us, we're going to eat your switching costs. It's not going to cost you anything. We're going to buy out your old phone. We're going to give you a new phone for free. So there's no switching costs and we have better service. That's what they're actually saying in those ads, or we're more cost effective for all of the above. So the next time you see one of those annoying cell phone commercials, that's exactly what is going on there. So digital platforms, any digital platform is a platform that facilitates interactions between 2 or more distinct but independent groups of users. So these are various e-commerce and gaming things. So Amazon, or your online Xbox gaming or PlayStation gaming. Uber is an example. Lyft is an example. DoorDash is an example. So you've had probably quite a bit of experience with digital platforms. And we're going to take a look at the largest ones here. The largest ones here are in China. Amazon is the largest in the United States. And there are a few in Japan and Indonesia as well. So this is just a various list of the 10 largest online market platforms by gross merchandise volume. And I'm sure you've, at least the American ones, you can definitely recognize here. So what about user engagement versus the need to charge fees? So the value of digital platforms comes from connecting different groups of people with each other. A digital platform will have an incentive to maximize the size of each of the groups using it. They want more users. All digital platforms want the most users they can. So while they must make money, charging fees to groups using the platform is going to decrease use. So once again, digital platforms are highly susceptible to loss of demand if they start charging or raising what they cost. So here's an example. If Sony charges gamers a fee, it's going to discourage at least some gamers from buying PlayStations, which in turn will make game developers less eager to develop new games for the PlayStation, because there's going to be fewer users to sell the products to. Sony has to charge fees to at least one of the groups, but it has to take into account not only the reaction of the groups being charged, but the reaction of all of the other groups using the platform. So if we look here, this social media company can obtain revenue from either its users or its advertisers. So that's what we're looking at in this one here. Market for social networking and market for advertising. If we look at the left, the demand is going to drop steadily if they choose to raise their price. So right now we're at P1 and demand is right here. If they chose to raise their price, demand is going to plummet. So as a consequence, that's not a very positive thing here. So what if we look at the one for the market for advertising? So in part B here, the decline in the number of users would drop the demand for advertisements from D0 to D1. So if they raise their price, you're going to lose advertising. Demand for advertising is going to go from D0 to D1, because why am I going to want to advertise with a company that now has a lot less users? So if they choose to raise their price from P0 to P1, advertising demand is going to pull in, and as a consequence, we're going to lose a lot of our advertisers. So what is going to happen here? The amount of the rectangle shown in blue, or what we would gain if we go from P0 to P1. So at P0 we have a tremendous amount of demand. Demand is about halved now by going to P1. That blue rectangle is what we would make. However, the yellow rectangle is what we're going to lose in terms of advertising revenue. So if we choose to raise the cost of our social network, it's actually going to hurt us, because the money we make from our users, and now we have a lot less of them, is going to be a lot less than we would make from our advertisers if we had all of our original users. So this is why most social networks are outwardly free, because of the money they make from advertising. So if we want to summarize this, let's say TikTok came up with a new policy to increase the amount of revenue from its users, but it would cause their advertising revenue to crash. So TikTok, if you were in charge of their pricing, you would not want to raise prices on your users, because you're going to actually lose money. You're going to lose a lot of money in your advertising revenue. So because of this, platforms often have a strong incentive to set a price of 0 for one or more of the groups using it, and that group is generally the users. The one who has to pay money, that's the advertisers. Facebook doesn't let people advertise on it for free, so that's who they are charging money to make a profit, whereas the end user, you or me, that uses Facebook or TikTok, we're going to get to use the product for free. So what about the difference between direct and indirect network effects? Well, direct network effects are something that you can directly quantify. And they occur when an increase in the size of a network connected to a digital platform either causes benefits or harm to members of that network, regardless of the status of others connected to it. So in this case, that would be more buyers in eBay is a positive direct network effect, because now there's more product reviews, and that would be a direct effect. An indirect effect occurs when an increase in the size of a network connected to a digital platform causes benefit or harm to network members by affecting the value of another network connected to it. So in the eBay example, an increase in the number of buyers also indirectly improves the value of being part of eBay's buyer network by attracting more sellers, making prices more competitive. That's an indirect effect. So here is just various things: data networks, marketplaces, social media companies, gaming platforms, and communications networks. These are just all various internet firms grouped by their category and direct or indirect network effects. So what ones have low network effects, high network effects. Some are both high direct and indirect, some are high direct and low indirect, some are high indirect and low direct, and some are in the middle. And that's what we're looking at here. So what is something that can happen to tech firms? Tech firms can face lawsuits from governments arguing they are monopolies. In 2000, Microsoft was found guilty of using Windows. Windows had over 90% of the market share, giving it its own web browser, and it was argued they had an unfair advantage. Google has also been found guilty of abusing its market dominance as well. So what can happen here? Well, they can get ordered to sell off parts of their business by regulators, or fined, or all of the above. So they can run into the risks we covered in the monopoly chapter, where they can face penalties if they're deemed to be a monopoly or operating like one. So, what are winner-take-all versus contestable industries? A winner-take-all industry is a single monopoly firm dominates its industry with almost uncontestable control, whereas contestable industries, upstart firms can grow their user bases and gain market share, even when the dominant ones have economies of scale and positive network effects. So you could argue Facebook was an upstart in the early 2000s against MySpace and Friendster. Then they became the dominant one, and now things like Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok have sprung up, and they compete against Facebook. Ironically, Facebook bought Instagram, but the other two are owned by other companies. So this argues that most internet industries are contestable to at least some degree, as long as the leading firm is not an insurmountable barrier. So even though Facebook is much larger than those other firms, they do still make a lot of money and can compete. And how do they compete? Well, they compete with product differentiation. Why would I want to get another social media app when I already, let's say, have Facebook and Snapchat? Well, TikTok comes along and it comes up with a new idea, sharing videos in a new way and interacting in a new way, and it compelled a lot of people to join. And the goal of social media and tech companies is generally, once again, multi-homing. Not to make you delete your Facebook, but to keep your Facebook and also join us as well. So, dealing with concentration in the corporate world, especially pertaining to things like digital companies, there are often takeovers and mergers, and they can be a matter of concern. And they're a matter of concern because they may lead to a monopoly. If Facebook bought all of its competitors, they would then have a monopoly. However, it's unclear that breaking up firms into smaller units will reduce industry concentration. So, in light of this, generally regulators try to focus on specific practices. So back to the Microsoft example, Microsoft was never broken up, but they were just ordered after that case to not bundle Internet Explorer with Windows or give you an option to download other browsers from the beginning, things like that. When you start up a cell phone, it might give you a choice of search engines, not just Google. It may say you can use a bunch of different ones. Those are all examples of anti-competitive practices instead of breaking up the company itself. And that brings us to our last slide here. In 2020, Epic Games sued Apple for acquiring apps sold through its platform, process payments for in-app purchases through Apple. So this company sued Apple because they weren't able to process payments from their own users. Anybody who downloaded it for an iPhone had to pay through the Apple App Store, who took a large commission on every sale. So a federal judge found this to be anti-competitive and argued that they should be allowed to charge their users directly, even if they are selling their product on the App Store. So regulators in other companies have, in other countries, have enacted rules forbidding such policies. So that's something. This is something continuously ongoing as technology changes. New apps come out, new companies come out. There will always be new lawsuits on ways which we can use the internet. And that's going to take us to our last slide and the end of the chapter.